Hi. So we have a couple minutes before the start of class, and maybe I can go ahead and start setting up these rooms here. Um, I think I had set you up into 5 rooms, and so yeah, okay, 5 groups. Well, I'm going to assign you to 1. Okay, well, it's time to start, and I'm trying to add you to the room that you joined, were assigned to last week. And of course, not everybody is here who was here last class, so it's a bit of a challenge, but I will just assign people to groups and let's see who's left. Okay, so open all the rooms, and so please join those rooms that you were assigned to last class, and to go so that we can do our exercise that we began at the last class in terms of identifying cases of terrorism. And before I forget, let me make sure that we do the cyber campus attendance. And so we go to week 15 and add smart attendance, and your number is 479. 479 is your number, so 479 is your number. And so let me go to chat, and 479 is your number. Okay, so that's your number. And so let's go back and then continue with the exercise we started the last class. And again, please join the groups that you were assigned to. And let me see, somebody wants to be has joined come late, so let me see where that person goes. So that's Sung Ho. Let me see where that person goes, if I can find it here. And Sung and So. No, I don't know. Can't really see where that person goes. I guess I'll just have to assign them to somewhere. As I look here at the pictures I took at the meetings last class. So I will assign you to room 5. So assign you to room 5. Okay. So okay, so those are the rooms. So let's go back and then look at the exercise that we started at last class. And again, so let me share screen, and we go here. So who's terrorism? What is terrorism? Who are the terrorists? So you were asked to, group 1 was supposed to look at the cases 1 and 2. Group 2 was supposed to look at cases 3 and 4. Room 2, that is. Room 3 was supposed to look at cases 5 and 6. Room 4 was supposed to look at cases 7 and 8. And room 5 was supposed to look at cases 9 and 10. So, and in each of these 10 cases, you were asked which of the situations below are terrorism, who are the terrorists in the situation, and what additional information would you need to know more to be more sure of your answers. So, room one. Let me see here. We go here. So I think you were assigned the breakout rooms. Can you all hear me? I think you can all hear me, right? And so somebody coming late. So who does this person go to? Let me see here. So we go to room 4. Assign this person to room 4. Okay. So you can all hear me, correct? I think you can, right? And what's this? Okay, breakout rooms. Okay, so you can all hear me. I can close the rooms. So again, if you need more time to consult with each other, let me flip a coin and see who's going to speak for each room. And heads is the first person in each group. Just a second here. Okay. All right. So heads is the first person in each group. And it is, let me see. I don't know if you can see me if I have the breakout rooms open. So let me flip a coin. It's tails. So it's not the first person in each group. The first person, it'll be the bottom person if it's heads. Let me see. And it's not the bottom person. So it's the person in the middle. And it is, so that's, well, I guess maybe that's the best way to do it. Let's just say the first person in the group, because there's too many different size groups here. So Park Ji-yoon will speak for room 1. Kim Tong-yoon will speak for room 2. Shin Hae-pum will speak for room 3. Kim Soo-hyun will speak for room 4. And Song Hyun-ho will speak for room 5. And so again, you had these documents before, so please be prepared to speak. And so you have 60 seconds. Okay, Pak Jiun. Let's go through the case one here. And I think we covered this earlier in class, right? Soldiers from the country of Maroc surround a refugee camp made up of people from the country of Braga. The refugee camp is crowded with, and the people there are extremely poor. Most of the Bragan people in the refugee camp hate the Maroc army, believing that Maroc has invaded Bragan, has taken all the best land and resources for themselves, and treats people from Bragan very poorly. Young men in the refugee camp sometimes fire guns at the soldiers. According to an eyewitness, a reporter from the New York Times, Maroc soldiers use loudspeakers to call insults into the refugee camp in the Bragan language. Over the loudspeakers, soldiers shout obscenities and things like, son of a whore. They dare Bragan boys to come out near the electric fence that separates the refugee camp from a wealthy settlement of Maroc citizens. When the boys, sometimes as young as 10 or 11, and young men go near the fence to throw stones or yell at the Maroc soldiers, the soldiers use silencers and fire on the boys with live ammunition, often killing or maiming them. In an article, the New York Times reporter expressed horror at what he witnessed. He wrote, children have been shot in other conflicts I haven't covered. Death squads gunned them down in El Salvador and Guatemala. Mothers with infants were lined up and massacred in Algeria. And Serb snipers put children in their sights and watched them crumple under the pavement in Sarajevo. But I have never before watched soldiers entice children like mice into a trap and murder them for sport. The Maroc government clearly knows about the behavior of their soldiers and does nothing to stop them. Indeed, Maroc soldiers so regularly taunt Bragan citizens that this behavior appears to be the policy of the Maroc government. One additional fact, every year Maroc is given an enormous amount of money and military equipment by the country of Bolaire, which is aware of how these are used by Maroc. So, room one, is this a situation involving terrorism?
So when defining a thing, it's you got to look at the intent, right? Are they going to look to terrorize them, to invoke fear? Possibly, but it's more akin to a war crime rather than terrorism.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. War crime, terrorism. You distinguish terrorism from a war crime. Typically, is a crime committed during a military operations which involve the failure to exercise adequate protection against non-military targets. So, like if I kill a lot of civilians with a drone strike without being certain that there was actually a military target that justified launching that attack, or if I killed too many civilians, even though I wanted to kill one supposed terrorist that I claim is a terrorist, that could be a war crime. And you're right, it's subjective. So do you consider that? But I think the point is that there has to be a military operation in progress. So is this a military operation?
I mean, if people are stationed in that area, then it should be a military operation, correct?
I get you, and you know what? You're highlighting an important point. These are controversial questions and points, and I think you might know what case this is, although I'm not going to tell you right away. But the government of Maroc that's engaging in this kind of behavior with the Maroc soldiers shooting the people, they claim that they're in an ongoing state of war with the Bragan people. And the Bragan people want to destroy Maroc. And the Bragan people's government is ruling the Bragan people, and the Bragan people's government wants to destroy Maroc. And so, of course, typically people don't admit, governments never admit that they commit war crimes. They always claim that what they're doing is justified by the laws of war, which in Latin is jus in bellum, law of war, and that they never say that they're committing a war crime. I mean, the Americans don't admit they commit war crimes. I mean, or whomever never admits they commit war crimes. So Maroc doesn't admit that this is a war crime situation, but Maroc claims that they're in a life and death struggle with the people of Bragan and the terrorist government, the terrorist rulers of Bragan. And until the terrorist government of Bragan makes peace, agrees to accept the existence of Morocco, they will continue to stop the Bragan people from preparing to launch terrorist attacks that kill innocent Morocco civilians, as well as Morocco soldiers. So who do you think is Morocco and who do you think is Bragan?
I mean, I'm assuming that it's a Turkey and the Kurdish, right? It's not.
No, Morocco is Israel. Bragan is Gaza Strip Hamas. Bragan is the Gaza Strip where the Palestinians are concentrated, and Morocco is Israel. And it says here that Morocco is every year Morocco is given enormous amounts of money and military equipment by the country of Belair. Who's Belair?
Guess that would be the U.S. then.
Yes, indeed. It's the United States of America. This New York Times reporter was Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges was a senior correspondent for the New York Times. He was at one time Washington bureau chief, and he's no longer working for the New York Times. There's a Wikipedia entry for him, Chris Hedges. Maybe I can find that just to show you, that these are real human beings who are reporting on these things. So just to show you who Chris Hedges is, and he is a frequent guest on leftist news podcasts like Democracy Now! That I can listen to. That's Chris Hedges. So that was Chris Hedges reporting from when he was still working for the New York Times. And so it was a New York Times reporter. It wasn't some, a pro left Hamas reporter. I mean, it was a New York Times reporter reporting on this. Okay, and he's become. It seems to become more radical as he's in his career, as partly as a consequence of what he witnessed during his career. Okay, and okay, so going on then with case 2. And I don't want to, so it says here, farmers from the country of Belveron are angry at their own government and at corporation from the country of Paradar. The Belveron government has allowed the Paradar Corporation to plant test crops of genetically engineered cotton. The genetically engineered crops produce their own pesticide. Many Belveron farmers worry that the genetically engineered crops will pollute their crops, as has happened many times in other countries, and will lead to a breed of super pests that will be immune to chemical pesticides and also to the organic pest control methods many poor farmers use. Without growing and selling cotton, the farmers have no way to feed their families. Belveron farmers also believe that the Paradar Corporation does not really care about them, but they instead care only for their own profit. They believe that the corporation wants to get Belveron farmers addicted to genetically engineered cotton seeds, which the corporation has patented so that the corporation will have a monopoly. Belveron farmers further point out that the corporation has not told the farmers that the tests on their land will be maybe risky and could pollute their non-genetically engineered cotton crops. Belveron farmers have announced that they will burn to the ground all the genetically engineered cotton crops. They hope to drive the Paradar Corporation out of Belveron. Belveron farmers have also threatened that they may destroy the offices of the Paradar Corporation. So is this a situation involving terrorism? Group 1?
Could be. I mean, if they want to coerce them out of their lands by, committing, this kind of heinous acts, then it could possibly be viewed as terrorism. I mean, if it's invoking fear out of it, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, the intent to use terror as a method of control, as a method of gaining your objectives by instilling mass terror in people in the target of your policies, that seems to be critical in the discussion of what is terrorism. Do you purposefully try to use terror to cow or beat down or destroy opposition, political opposition to you by threatening horrible costs that are intolerable to the not just to the soldiers but to the civilians, to the women and children and non-fighting people that are not in the military? Is that part of your strategy and your use of policies, including coercion, not only of course dropping bombs, but maybe starving people to death, right? as a way by which to try to threatening with starvation. Is that a form of terrorism? And there's no concrete agreement on this, but of course, all the time, United States and other governments throw around the term terrorism. And a question that emerges is, can corporations and governments engage in terrorism? Is the only terrorism something which non-governmental, non-corporate actors like Hamas or the individuals can engage in, but not, or Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, they can engage in terrorism, but corporations and governments by definition cannot engage in terrorism? So let me ask you, who do you think is Belveron and who is Paradar? Who is the Paradar Corporation? Who's Belveron? You want to guess?
Not quite sure, but I think it might be an American company and maybe somewhere in like Eastern Europe, maybe, possibly.
Let me stop. Well, let me open up because I forget who it is. So let me, and I don't think you can see this, so I don't want to give it away right now. Belveron is India. Paradar is the United States. The corporation is Monsanto. So Monsanto, they are a leader, a world leader. They were bought by Bayer, the German company Bayer, a couple of years ago. But Monsanto is the leader in producing genetically modified crops, agricultural crops. They are under the trademark Ready Roundup, Ready Roundup. So I think again, Wikipedia's surely got let's see, do they have this? Okay, yeah, here, let me see if I can share this screen. So this is the name of the trademark for the genetically modified crops that Monsanto created and Bayer now owns. That they're crops that are resistant to herbicides. So genetically modified rice, cotton, wheat, corn, soybeans that you can plant, and then you can use chemicals to kill weeds. And the chemicals will not kill the genetically modified soybeans or cotton or wheat. And so because they're resistant to the chemicals that will kill the weeds and the pests. And they've been around for quite some time. It says 1996, so that's a long time that these Ready Roundup soybeans and the like have been produced. And the Indian farmers have been resisting the introduction of genetically modified organisms into India. And I was going to show you something which, I go to 7-Eleven to buy that barbecued corn that's sold in plastic, and I don't have the package here because I ate it all yesterday. But they're advertising those that barbecued corn that comes vacuum packed in plastic at 7-Eleven as non-GMO. That's not GMO. So even Koreans are hesitant about GMO crops. But Paradar Monsanto, which is, as I said, Monsanto was bought by Bayer. So you look here, Monsanto Corporation, in 2016, the German company Bayer acquired Monsanto. And so Monsanto and Bayer are being sued because the claim is that these chemicals that are involved in killing weeds and pests, crop seed GMOs, that these cause cancer. And so Bayer is paying out money in lawsuits claiming that these chemicals, that are part of the Ready Roundup system of planting and herbicides, that those herbicide chemicals to kill weeds, they cause cancer in people, including people that work for them. So, and of course, the Indian farmers have been in the news these days because they're on strike and they're trying to stop liberalization of the agricultural markets by the Narendra Modi government in India. And they forced the Modi government to back down, at least temporarily. But the Modi government wants to consolidate the agricultural sector in India, which means make the small farmers give up their land to create bigger and bigger farms, which means you're going to have more and more farmers losing their land and becoming workers. And they're fighting those laws that they're attempting to implement to make the Indian agricultural sector become more efficient. And And of course, they're under pressure from the U.S. and the in particular to open up Indian agriculture to American agricultural exports and American agricultural investment, including by Monsanto and now by Bayer, since the German company Bayer bought it. The Modi government in India is negotiating at the same time, of course, as India wants good relations with the U.S. and European Union and Japan to deal with China. And so this is a very important negotiation going on now between India and the United States and European Union regarding the liberalization of the agricultural sector. And that means allowing American corporations to be more active there. And of course, the American corporations, they're making lots of money off GMO, genetically modified crops. Okay, so back to the exercise. And so group 2, room 2. Oh, no, stop share. Don't want you to see that. Wrong one. Room 2. So here we go. Ah, I don't want you to see that. I got to close that. I don't want you to see that yet. So there we go. Share screen. Here we go. All right. So room 2. It says here, the Kalimo army has invaded the country of Iona next door. There are a number of refugee camps in Iona with thousands of, well, you know what, we're running out of time here. So we're gonna have to flip a coin. So we'll pick either room, for room 2, if it's heads, we'll talk about case 3, or if it's tails, we'll talk about case 4, just to make sure we get to all the rooms. And it is tails, so let's talk about room case 4. A corporation based in the country of Menin has a chemical factory located in the much poorer country of Pungur. One night, huge amounts of poisonous gases from the factory began spewing out into the area around the factory. Nobody outside the factory was warned because someone in the company had turned off the safety siren. Not until the gas was upon the residents in their beds, searing their eyes, filling their mouths and lungs, did the communities surrounding the factory know of their danger. According to one report, gasping for breath and near blind meant people stampeded into narrow alleys. In the mayhem, children were torn from the hands of their mothers, never to see them again. Those who still could were screaming. Some were racked with seizures and fell under trampling feet. Some, stumbling in a sea of gas, their lungs on fire, were drowned in their own bodily fluids. No one knows how many people died, but perhaps as many as 6,000 that night. And the years after, more than 10,000 more people died. The corporation had begun a cost-cutting drive prior to the disaster, lowering training periods for operatives, using low-cost materials, adopting hazardous operating procedures, cutting the number of operatives in half. A confidential company audit prior to the accident had identified 61 hazards. Nothing was done. After the tragedy, the corporation concentrated on avoiding liability, sending in its legal team days before a medical team. Company officials lied about the poisonous nature of the chemicals at the plant. To this day, the corporation refuses to disclose medical information on the leaked gases, maintaining it to be a trade secret. The company did pay some of the victims' families. On average, victims received less than $350 from the company, a total loss of 48 cents per share of company stock. Today, conditions in this Pungar community are hazardous. Soil and water are still heavily contaminated. Mercury has been, and let me open up another file here. Mercury has been it says, mercury has been found at between 20,000 and 6 million times the expected levels. In this community, the rate of stillborn infants is 3 times the national average of Pungur. Infant mortality is twice as high as the national average. So group 2, is this a case of terrorism? Group 2?
Yep.
It is? Why is it a case of terrorism? Is this Kang Tong-un? Kang Tong-yun?
This is Kim Dong-yun.
Okay, Kim, I'm sorry, Kim Tong-yoon. So why is this a case of terrorism?
I think there's a sudden attack of gas terrorism.
Yeah. So is there was intent to kill these people?
I think so.
Well, I mean, I don't, you know, actually, I think the emphasis here is that the corporation tried to cover this up. I mean, the corporation wants this to be obscured. We don't, like, for example, we still don't know how many people died from it. Thousands and thousands of people died. The corporation gave people $350 per person. The corporation still does not even admit does not describe what was in the gas. So it's not like, for example, the Germans gassing people at death camps during World War II in concentration camps in Auschwitz, for example, in Poland. It's not the same situation, but the refusal of the corporation to provide adequate and full disclosure and full transparent investigation to learn fully 100% what happened, who suffered, who died, who's suffering, how much the cost is. It's a case of a massive cover-up that killed, we don't know how many thousands of people, and we still don't know to this day. And this corporation, by the way, it went, well, I think it declared bankruptcy. This corporation declared bankruptcy, and they officially went out of business, but they declared bankruptcy to avoid legal liability. And it was a famous old American chemical company. And of course, it went technically bankrupt, but its operations continued. Somebody else bought it. It renamed itself. It declared bankruptcy to avoid the political and legal obligations of doing more for those people, which would have been massive, right? I mean, the corporation declared bankruptcy because it was a massive catastrophe. So, does anybody, happen to know what the company and the country where this happened is? You want to guess? Group 2, Kim Tong-un.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know.
It was India, Bhopal. It was the Bhopal disaster, and the company was Union Carbide. Union Carbide was an old. Let me see if I can call up. Yeah, Bhopal disaster here. So let me share the screen here. And I've not looked at this website. So this is the Bhopal disaster. And it's 1984. And so you can see, you don't really know how many people died. We still don't know. And this was in India. We still don't know who caused it, how it happened. It's not been investigated. It was the Union Carbide Corporation, which is now, I think, well, I think it went bankrupt. Hold it. No, I guess it's not bankrupt. I thought it went declared bankruptcy. Did it? I thought it did. Oh, evidently it's still here. No, I guess it's not bankrupt. I thought, well, again, I'll have to go back and investigate. So, okay, so let's go on then. And go to group 3 and stop share and go to share screen and go back to this. I think this is group 3. And so let's do Group 3 had cases 5 and 6. So let's do case 6. So group 3. Simultaneously, the embassies of the country of Anza in 2 other countries were bombed. In one country, 213 people were killed and over 100,000 injured. In the other, 11 people were killed and at least 70 injured. In retaliation, about 3 weeks later, Anza launched missiles at the capital city of Baltus, destroying a pharmaceutical factory and injuring at least 10 people and killing 1. Anza claimed that this factory was manufacturing chemicals that could be used to make VX nerve gas. Although Anza offered no substantial proof of this claim, Anza, that was the chemical agent that was used to kill Kim Jong-un's brother, right, in Malaysia. Anza also claimed that a prominent individual whom they linked to the embassy bombings was connected to the pharmaceutical factory, although they provided no evidence of this claim either, and a great deal of evidence exists to prove that there is no link. Baltus pointed out that 2 years earlier they expelled the prominent individual and vigorously denied that the pharmaceutical plant was producing nerve gas agents. They said that this was an important factory producing 7% of the needed medicines for the people of Baltus, including vital medicines to treat malaria and tuberculosis. They allowed journalists and other diplomats to visit the factory to verify that no chemical weapons were being produced there. Journalists and others who visited the factory agreed that the destroyed factory appeared to be producing only medicines. It is not known how many people may have died in Baltus for lack of the medicines that were being produced in the factory. Anza blocked the United Nations from launching the investigation demanded by Baltus. So group 3, is this a case of terrorism? And that's Chu Songmin. Chu Songmin, is this a case of terrorism? Chu Songmin. Is this a case of terrorism? Well, Chu Songmin appears not to be really reacting. So let me ask you, is this a case, anybody, is this a case of terrorism? Or does anybody want to take a guess at who these countries are? Who is Anza and who is Baltus? Anybody want to guess? Nobody wants to guess? I'll tell you what, Anza begins with a U. The real name of the country begins with a U, the letter U.
Uganda? Maybe?
No! Try again.
Ukraine.
No!
United States.
Yay! Okay, and country Baltus. What is the country Baltus? What's the real name of that country Baltus? Baltus.
Iraq, I guess.
The country's name begins with the letter S.
South Korea.
No, not South Korea. I don't think the United States ever bombed South Korea, not since the Korean War, right? So the United States bombed this country, begins with an S. Sudan. Sudan, this was in 1998. Some groups attacked US embassies in Tanzania and in Kenya, and killed in Nairobi, blew up a car bomb into the US embassy in Nairobi and killed 213 people. And then also the US embassy in Tanzania in Africa. And this was under the Clinton administration in 1998. And the Clinton administration responded by launching cruise missile attacks on this factory in Baltus, claiming that Sudan, not Baltus, Sudan was responsible because Osama bin Laden was supposedly responsible for those attacks. Osama bin Laden, who the United States would blame for the September 11, 2001 attacks. And Sudan was supposedly hosting Osama bin Laden. And that, so the United States decided to punish Sudan by attacking this factory, blowing up this factory that it claimed was making chemical weapons, nerve gas, when in fact it was just a pharmaceutical plant making medicines in a very poor country, you know, that already suffering from epidemics and diseases. And then the United States destroyed their pharmaceutical factory that was providing medicines for the people against the diseases like malaria and tuberculosis. And the United States blocked the United Nations from investigating the case. Okay, group 4. We'll go to group 4 here, and we'll go to case 8. Group 4, led by the country of Lomandia, the United Nations waged a war against the country of Moretta, saying that Moretta illegally invaded another nearby country. After Moretta's army was defeated and removed from the country they invaded, Lomandia pushed for sanctions against Moretta until Moretta could prove that it was not engaged in a program to produce weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear bombs or poison gas. The sanctions meant that Moretta was not allowed to buy or sell almost anything from other countries in the world. Moretta could not get spare parts to repair water purification plants damaged by bombing during the war. It could not get medicines and spare parts from medical equipment. Moretta claimed that it allowed inspections from the United Nations, but Lomandia says that it did not. Documents from Lomandia show that it knew that Moretta's civilians were dying as a result of waterborne diseases. When asked in a television interview about the reports of massive numbers of civilian deaths, perhaps as many as 500,000 children over several years, a high government official from Lomandia said, "I think that is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it." So group 4, who do you think is the country of Lomandia, and what is the country of Moretta? What are their real names? And so room 4 is Kim Soo-hyun. Kim Soo-hyun.
Yep.
So what are the real names? Do you think of the real names of the country of Lomandia and Moretta? Who is Moretta? What countries? What's the real name of the country Moretta? You want to guess?
So it's Moretta real name?
Well, that's a fake name, but it's a real case. This is a real case, but they changed the names. And who is Lomandia?
Lomandia.
And who is Moretta? Okay, Moretta, the country's name begins with an I. The letter I.
Israel.
No. Says Lomandia says Moretta illegally invaded another country. So well, who do you think is the, try again, another country begins with the letter I. What?
I don't know, sir.
Iraq.
Iraq.
Iraq. And it's Iraq. So Moretta is Iraq. Who is Lomandia? Begins with the letter U.
United States.
Yay! United States. So Iraq invaded Kuwait and wanted to under Saddam Hussein because Saddam Hussein of Iraq thought he had American support because America supported him against his war with Iran from 1980 to 1988. Iran agreed to a ceasefire with Iraq, and then Saddam Hussein in Baghdad in Iraq viewed Kuwait as trying to destroy his government by pumping too much oil because Kuwait felt threatened by Iraq having become very powerful and fighting the war against Iran with the support of the United States and the Soviet Union and the whole world basically allied with Saddam Hussein of Iraq after Saddam Hussein ordered the Iraqi army to attack Iran. and then the Iranians counterattacked, and Iraq would have been defeated by Iran were it not for the fact that the United States and the Soviet Union and the whole world basically allied with Iraq and Saddam Hussein to keep Iran from winning that war. And so, of course, Saddam Hussein of Iraq, he claimed he was ruling Iraq because he wanted to unify the Arab people into one big Arab state and unify the Arabs with himself as sort of like the Kim Il-sung or the Otto von Bismarck of the Arabs. Otto von Bismarck unified the Germans, and Kim Il-sung wanted to unify the Koreans under his rule, and that he was going to be the Otto von Bismarck of the Arabs. And he thought he had American support, or at least American acquiescence, after he had demonstrated his usefulness to the Americans for 8 years in containing Iran. And so he invaded Kuwait in 1990, and the Americans then engaged in their war against Saddam Hussein, drove the Iraqi army out of Kuwait, but did not attack Baghdad, did not invade Baghdad. They instead put sanctions on Iraq, harsh economic sanctions on Iraq, hoping that somebody would overthrow Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And nobody ever did. But the sanctions were very, very cruel. Iraq basically could not import almost anything. And as a result, Iraq's economy collapsed, and the death rate for people in Iraq increased tremendously from disease, from lack of medical care. Keep in mind, this is the danger going on in Afghanistan today, right? The Americans have put sanctions on the Taliban. They don't want the world, they don't want anybody to do business with the Taliban until the Taliban agrees to their terms in Afghanistan. So we have a humanitarian crisis in Iraq and also a humanitarian crisis in Yemen. So this is a familiar story. And the United Nations was responsible for overseeing the sanctions regime implementation against Iraq. And individuals in the United Nations resigned out of despair, out of how the Iraqi people were suffering, because Saddam Hussein was not able to satisfy the United States, and they couldn't import anything, and hundreds of thousands of children died that would not have died if the sanctions were not placed on Iraq. And 2 UN officials resigned over this. I remember this is in the 1990s. One was named Spinner, another one was named von Spanek. And this was happening under the Clinton administration, right? This is occurring under the Clinton administration, under Bill Clinton. And I think this is a statement by the US Secretary of State at the time, Madeleine Albright, that we have to keep Saddam Hussein in his box. And finally, when the September 11, 2001 attacks happened on the United States, then George W. Bush decided that he was just going to get rid of Saddam Hussein's government in Baghdad, because he claimed that, of course, that Saddam Hussein was trying to develop weapons of mass destruction, but he also indicated that one source of the anger among Muslims in the Middle East against the United States was the suffering of the people of Iraq. And so it was necessary to invade Baghdad and get rid of Saddam Hussein so that the suffering of the people of Iraq would end, because nobody was going to overthrow Saddam Hussein like the Americans hoped. And so one of the reasons for invading Iraq was to get rid of that regime that would not fall otherwise. Okay, room 5, case 10. The Sport King Corporation produces athletic equipment sold all over the world. Although the headquarters of Sport King is in the country of Morcosas, all of its products are manufactured in other countries. Sport King contracts with subcontractors to make its products. Over 500,000 people, mostly women, work for these subcontractors in poor countries. Sport King has a code of conduct, quote unquote, which is supposed to ensure that workers are not mistreated by Sport King's subcontractors. For example, no child laborers are supposed to be hired. No prisoners may be used as workers. Workers may not be forced to work more than 60 hours a week, etc. Sport King's code of conduct specifies that workers must be paid a country's minimum wage. However, it does not say that this minimum wage needs to be a living wage. It doesn't have to be enough for people to live on. Even poor country governments admit that and let me open up the other file here. And so let me make sure you can see that. That the minimum wage is not enough for people to live on. Sport King says that it pays the legal wage, but it knows that not all its workers can survive on this wage. Companies like Sport King locate their factories in countries that don't allow unions, that outlaw strikes, and that jail workers who demand higher pay and better conditions. In fact, Sport King chooses to locate its factories in some of the most repressive countries in the world. Human rights groups argue that companies like Sport King knowingly locate their factories in repressive places so that workers can more easily be controlled and exploited. These human rights groups argue that companies like Sport King could easily afford to pay their workers living wages, but because this would come out of their enormous profits, they choose not to. So, room 5, who is Sport King? What is the real name of that company, Sport King, room 5? And that would be Song Hyun Ho.
Maybe Nike.
Yay, Nike! Yay! I think it's Nike. Let me check. And let me see here. And yes, Sport King is Nike, although it could be many transnational corporations. What is the country Marcosis that's referenced there? That the company headquarters. Where is the country headquartered? Where's Nike headquartered?
United States.
Yay, United States. All right. Okay, so let's go back then to talk about case 3. So this is room 2. Okay, back to room 2. The Kalimo Army. Make sure I'm sharing that screen here. Just a second. I got to screen share. So let me close that and close that. And let me screen share just a second. So room 2. Yeah, I got to redo this again because it's too many screens open at once. The Kalimo Army has invaded the country of Iona next door. There are a number of refugee camps in Iona with thousands of people living in them. The refugees themselves lost their homes many years before, some in wars with Kalimo, others were forced out of their homes by Kalimo. The area around the refugee camps is controlled by the Kalimo Army. The commander of the Kalimo Army sealed off the refugee camps and allowed militias from Iona, who are hostile to the refugees, to enter 2 refugee camps and slaughter hundreds of people. The killing went on for 40 hours. At least 1,800 people were murdered, perhaps more. One additional fact, the Kalimo Army receives a great deal of military aid from the country of Terramar. Terramar learned of the massacre of the refugees in Iona, but did not stop military aid to Kalimo. So room 2. Who is Kalimo? Who is Iona? Who is Terramar? You want to guess?
Can you give us a hint?
Okay, Kalimo, the first letter of the real name of the country Kalimo begins with an I. The letter I. Pick a country that begins with the letter I.
India.
Pick another one.
Iraq.
One more. You can't do it? You give up?
Iran.
Eh. The answer is Israel. Israel. What is the country Iona? Begins with the letter L. Like in Larry. Begins with the letter L. Pick one. Hint, it's got to be a country that is on the border with Israel. If Israel is going to invade it, give up? Anyone?
Lebanon.
Lebanon, yay, Lebanon. So this refers to and finally, what is the country of Terramar? Begins with a U.
United States.
Yes, United States. So let me see what comes up when I do a Wikipedia page for Beirut massacres. Sabra, it's in Sabra and Shatila massacre. Yeah, there is a Wikipedia entry, of course, for it. So we go there. Let me stop share and share the screen. So this is the case of the Sabra and Shatila Palestinian refugee camp in Beirut. So the Palestinian people, of course, during the creation of the state of Israel, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled or fled in terror from their homes of what became Israel. And they went to different refugee camps, and there are refugee camps all over the Middle East, including in Beirut, Lebanon. And Sabra and Shatila are these Palestinian camps. And Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 to push out the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, Yasser Arafat's organization that was fighting for the Palestinians out of Lebanon. And they went all the way up to Beirut and surrounded Beirut. And they allowed groups in Lebanon that hate the Palestinians, namely the Maronite Christian Lebanese forces groups, the Maronite Christian militia, to go into the camps. They massacred thousands of people. And so you can see bodies of the dead, of the massacred. Israel knew this was happening, and the United States knew this was happening. And so that's a case of it says in June 1982, the Israeli Defense Forces invaded Lebanon with the intention of rooting out the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And the United States and France and Italy came in to try to de-escalate the conflict, and the PLO withdrew. But at the same time, they also allowed in these Lebanese Phalange groups to go into these refugee camps and kill thousands, hundreds, we don't really know how many thousands died, how many people died in these refugee camps. And so you can see, you can read the Wikipedia page on your own. Okay, so back to the exercises. So that's 3. So we did 3 and 4. So we can close this one, and that's and open up the other page. And okay, so this would be room 3. Room 3. So you have case 5. The Tobian government is very unhappy with the government of Anbar, whose leaders came to power in a revolution that threw out the former Anbar dictator. Tobian decides to overthrow the new Anbar leaders. It begins funding a guerrilla army that attacks Anbar from another country next door. Tobian also builds army bases in the next door country and allows the guerrilla army to use these bases. Tobian supplies almost all of the weapons and equipment of the guerrilla army fighting Anbar. The guerrillas generally try to avoid fighting Anbar's army. Instead, they attack clinics, schools, and cooperative farms. Sometimes they mine the roads. Tobian-supported guerrillas kill and maim many, many civilians. The guerrillas raid Anbar and then retreat into the country next door where Tobian has military bases. So what is the government of Ambar? Who do you think is Ambar? Group room 3. And let's see, who's room 3? Oh, I think we had some problem with room 3 last time. So let me see. Room 3, that's Chu Song Min. And I think Chu Song Min is telling me that they have a problem with their, yeah, they have a, she's saying, this person is saying their microphone is not working. So we can't talk with Chu Song Min. So anybody want to guess who is the government of Ambar? Who is Ambar?
Iran, maybe?
It begins with the letter N, as in Nicholas. Anybody want to guess? Country that begins with the letter N.
Nicaragua? Maybe?
Yay, Nicaragua! Nicaragua. So the United States is supplying the Contras. Oh, sorry, I gave it away. Who's the Tobian government? Begins with the letter U.
US.
United States, yay, United States, yay. So the United States government was unhappy with the Sandinistas overthrowing the pro-American Somoza family dictatorship in Nicaragua in the late 1970s. And when Ronald Reagan came to power, it became president of the United States in 1980, he began arming, his administration began arming and supplying the contra-revolutionaries. They're called contra-revolutionaries, and they were based in the neighboring country of Honduras. So Nicaragua, but particularly Honduras and Guatemala, they've been a major source of refugees trying to flee and to enter the United States over the last several years, in part because there's terribly corrupt narco trafficking governments that, and as you might guess, since they have a history of collaborating with the CIA and US Defense Department against revolutionary leftist forces, they have become quite strong, these corrupt structures, including in Honduras and in Guatemala. So the United States set up covert military bases in Honduras on the border with Nicaragua to arm and train the Contras. And this is a country of only, Nicaragua is only a country of like 2.1 million people, and tens of thousands of people died in the contra-revolutionary Contras attacks. And it eventually led to Daniel Ortega losing the election in Nicaragua to Violeta Chamorro in 1989. And then Daniel Ortega of the Sandinistas come back into power through elections, and now he's the president, basically acting like a dictator in Nicaragua, including putting Violeta Chamorro's daughter in prison. And so I didn't ask you if that's a case of terrorism, but think about that. And then we go to, let me see, we already did 6, so we did 7. So room 4, case number 7, at least 1 million people in the country of Lukin are infected with HIV/AIDS. Between 1991 and 2001, 700,000 people died of AIDS in Lukin. Currently, about 300 people die each day of AIDS-related causes. Largely because of HIV/AIDS crisis, life expectancy in Lukin is expected to drop from 43 to 33 years, a level last experienced in Europe in medieval times. AIDS could be controlled with a combination of drugs, frequently called a drug cocktail, including AZT. However, given current drug prices, this could cost as much as $18,000 a year per patient. This year, Lukin will pay $174 million in interest payments on its debt, most of which will go to two large international banks. This debt was incurred many years ago by a different government than the current one. The loans were pushed by banks, which had huge amounts of money to lend because of oil-producing countries had deposited so much of their revenue to these banks. As one observer put it, the banks were hot to get in. All of the banks stepped forward. They showed no foresight. They didn't do any credit analysis. It was wild. Loans benefited mostly bankers and the rich of Lukin. However, most people in Lukin are poor. The gross national product per capita is $350. The $174 million in interest payments is more than the money Lukin will spend on healthcare and education combined. money that could go to pay for AIDS prevention and therapies for people with AIDS instead is being sent to banks in so-called developed countries. The international banks know about the dire health situation of Lukin. They have allowed Lukin to postpone some debts, but only after Lukin agreed to certain conditions set by the banks that gave the banks greater control over Lukin's economy. For example, requiring Lukin to sell its national bank to private investors. Still, so long as the banks force Lukin to pay interest on its debts, there's no way Lukin can deal effectively with the AIDS crisis. 300 people a day continue to die. So, room 4. What is the country of Lukin? What is the real name of Lukin?
Brazil?
Could you say again, please?
Brazil? Brazil, right? Brazil.
Brazil? No.
Yep.
Begins with a Z. The country's name begins with a Z. It's not a really well-known country in the news, right? It's Zambia. Zambia. And of course, this caused a lot of controversy. And because of pressure by non-governmental organizations, human rights organizations, because of human rights lobbying and pressures, the governments of the United States and other countries where these big pharmaceutical companies are located, like Pfizer, like Merck, like AstraZeneca are located, they agreed to make available these AIDS drugs and offer the production and patent rights to these poor countries like Zambia to make these drugs available. So, and that began in the mid-1990s, that pressure. And I mean, the drugs were invented in the mid-1990s, but it was as a result of that public opinion pressure, only as a result of that public opinion pressure, did the governments and corporations in the rich areas of the world come up with an arrangement, an agreement by which they would make available these AIDS drugs to these people, these poor countries. It didn't happen as a consequence of the functioning of the marketplace. It didn't happen as a natural outcome of economics. It happened because there was pressure put by the governments of countries like Zambia and Africa, but also by big companies, by non-governmental organizations, human rights organizations, and others to pressure the United States government and these corporations to make these drugs available at low prices, at very low prices to these people in Africa. And as a result, AIDS is now, it's a manageable disease. And the reason why, of course, one of the reasons why this is important today is because we have a similar situation now with COVID-19, that of course, it's much more transmissible than HIV/AIDS, and we need to get people vaccinated. But these corporations are not going to be able to vaccinate the people of Africa just as a result of economic incentives. There needs to be coordinated efforts by governments, corporations, and international organizations to make these vaccines, to get these companies to work with African corporations, African companies, African facilities to produce and distribute these vaccines. It's not going to happen just by economic forces. There has to be political intervention if we're going to vaccinate the world. And that's the lesson to take from the HIV/AIDS experience, that these drugs that came in to regulate and control AIDS, so it's no longer a death sentence, became available after these corporations made a lot of money. But then the international organizations like the United Nations and public opinion pressure from human rights groups on these corporations push these companies and these governments to make political arrangements to produce these cocktail HIV drugs to make them available to people in Africa. So you don't really hear too much about HIV/AIDS so much these days, although again, it's now in the news actually, because this there's speculation that this Omicron variant of the coronavirus, the Omicron, that it developed in somebody who has HIV/AIDS, because HIV/AIDS suppresses or weakens the immune system. That's the nature of HIV/AIDS. It destroys the immune system in the body. And so it let this Corona-19 virus continue to exist in the human body and mutate and replicate, mutate to produce this new Omicron variant. Because in other words, it was still because there's HIV/AIDS. Millions of people are infected with HIV/AIDS in Africa. These cocktail of drugs are not a cure. They're just a way by which to control HIV/AIDS so it doesn't kill you. But it does suppress, but still HIV/AIDS suppresses the immune system. They haven't yet succeeded in creating an effective vaccine against HIV/AIDS. They've been working on it for years, but they haven't been successful in creating one. But again, this case of how to get these HIV drugs to poor countries is the model being used or discussed to discuss how to make available vaccines and COVID-19 treatments in the poor regions like Africa and elsewhere of the world. Okay, so room 5, case 9. So we just go through, I think, just a couple of sentences here. Bartavia is considered by many to be one of the most repressive countries in the world. So let me close that and open up the other file. No, not that one, sorry. Oh, okay. Bartavia is considered by many to be one of, again, make sure I'm sharing the screen. Just a second, share screen. It says Bartavia is considered by many to be one of the most repressive countries in the world, especially if you are not white. Only whites can vote. Only whites can travel freely. Only whites can live where they like. Most whites live comfortably, even luxuriously. Conditions for people who are not white are some of the worst in the world. Bartavia imprisons people who organize for change. Torture is widespread and used by the Bartavia government against people working for equality. Over the years, there have been numerous massacres of non-white Bartavia civilians, sometimes of young children. The main organizations working for change in Bartavia have asked the world not to invest money in Bartavia and not to have economic or cultural relations with the country until it commits itself to change. Nevertheless, many countries continue to do business with Bartavia. One in particular, Serino, has allowed its corporations to increase their investments in Bartavia from $150 million to $2.5 billion, all of this during a period of tremendous violence and discrimination. Who knows how many thousands of people have been killed through guns or poverty as a result of Serino's actions. So, room 5, what is the real name of the country Bartavia?
South Africa.
Yay! And who was Serino?
United States.
Yay! United States. So yes, this is of course South Africa before 1994, when apartheid was abolished, when the system by which only white people could vote and participate in elections in South Africa ended. And of course, again, this is a legacy of the Cold War. Like I talk about in my US foreign policy class, right? During the Cold War, the Americans came to believe that anyone advocating radical change in these countries, in these African countries or Asian countries or Latin American countries, that they were basically open or implicit or open or covert agents of Moscow, or working to promote communism and the spread of communist domination. So the CIA, for example, played some role in Nelson Mandela, the first Black president of South Africa in 1994. He was an anti-apartheid activist. He was arrested in the early 1960s and put in jail. And the CIA played some role in identifying and helping find him and arrest him by the South African white police, by the South African white authorities, because they they viewed him as a radical who was spreading socialist and communist and therefore Soviet influence in Africa. So when the Cold War ended, we saw that the Americans' policy changed, and they no longer were obsessed about leftists in Africa and Asia, and the apartheid system ended in South Africa. But after much violence and suffering. Okay, so and so let me open up the identities here listed here so you can see them described, and share screen, and you can see the identities. Yes, so here you see, all right. And so here's the list of the identities of those countries. Okay, so my question to you then is, can a state commit state terrorism? Can a state commit terrorism? And that's not the one I want. 1 second, please. Let me find the exercise. Just a second. I'm looking for the. Is that it? No, that's not it. I have too many files that I have in my folder here, so I'm trying to find. Oh, okay, there it is. So the United Nations has a definition of terrorism, and so I can show you that definition of terrorism here that the United Nations has. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution by consensus on the 9th of December, 1994, that contained a declaration which the United Nations General Assembly annexed to it with a provision that defined terrorism as such. This is the international legal definition of terrorism. They are criminal acts intended or calculated to provoke a state of terror in the general public, a group of persons or particular persons for political purposes, or in any circumstance unjustifiable, whatever the considerations of a political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any other nature that may be invoked in order to justify them. Consequently, this provision sets out an acceptable definition of terrorism, and its three main elements are the following. The acts committed must, under most national legal systems, the acts must constitute a criminal offense, for example, murder, kidnapping, arson, etc. Secondly, among the public or particular groups of persons, the acts must aim at spreading terror to influence and control them. And thirdly, their motivation must be political for these acts. If terrorist acts fulfill these conditions, in addition, they are very serious or large scale, then regarding them as international crimes is necessary. So the general revulsion against this crime, the statements and declarations of many states demonstrate that it warrants the conclusion that any state has legal entitlement to bring to trial the individuals whom they allege to be the authors of such acts of terrorism who happen to be on its territory. And so we see some effort to try to expand what's called universal jurisdiction. So we see, for example, courts in Spain attempting to bring torturers to trial in Spain who committed torture, say, in Chile or Argentina, in South America, because these are considered international crimes. And in theory, international crimes against humanity may be tried by all courts anywhere around the world, by any state, regardless of where those crimes happen. So, for example, we're seeing now Germany just found guilty a police agent who worked for the Syrian government who tortured and killed people in Syria. And also Islamic State fighters who enslaved and killed people are being put on trial in European courts. Typically, if courts are going to engage in universal jurisdiction, then their governments of those countries, like Germany or Spain, they first need to adopt legislation that allows their courts to implement this universal jurisdiction to try crimes against humanity, including terrorism and other crimes. And there's some move now to try to expand those international crimes to include other areas, like, for example, environmental crimes. But the question I have, you can see here that the states themselves are the authors of these laws that make these crimes, these acts, crimes like murder, right? And because this is under most national legal systems. So my question to you is, according to this definition, can a state commit terrorism? Is it legally feasible for the government of a country to be guilty of terrorism? Not just Al-Qaeda or Islamic State or the Contras, but can a government commit state terrorism? And so let me ask you that. Let me go to the exercise statement here and vote. And I think I have to log in again. Yep, I have to log in again. So log in and share the screen again. So can a state commit terrorism? So please vote. And I think that's pretty much most people. So you agree? Yeah, I mean, I sort of gave it away. If you try a Syrian police agent, a policeman in Syria for torture and crimes involving torture of civilians, then that implies that governments can be guilty of crimes against humanity, including terrorism. The problem is, of course, that who decides if a country or state or actors engage in terrorism? And it's typically a national court. And national courts reflect often the interests of their national government. So the United States views the Taliban, for example, as having many individuals within its leadership who are terrorists. And the United States government made that determination. But these terrorists, they defeated America's allies in Afghanistan. The Americans left because the Americans could not defeat the Taliban. So this definition of terrorists is arbitrary and subjective because it reflects the interests of the states that are labeling these acts as terrorists, because they do so because they have political interests. So until we have a truly independent international court system, this is always going to be problematic, right? Even those people who were engaged in violent acts, say in Argentina or Chile in the 1970s against communists, they believed or argued that basically those people that they were arresting, that they were agents of Cuba and the Soviet Union, that Cuba and the Soviet Union are trying to overthrow their governments and put communist dictatorships in power. You know, the kinds of governments that's in power in North Korea, which is much worse than any military dictatorship. So they were engaged in a covert war against the agents of communist subversion. That's typically, they have an argument. Nobody admits that they're engaged in human rights violations or again, that they're engaged in international crimes. Even Israel, the United States, nobody admits that they engage in international crimes. They always say, well, we're at war, we're at war, we're at war. And at war, when you're at war, because another actor wants to destroy me and I have to fight back, I have to defend myself. And unfortunately, bad things happen in war and innocent people get killed, but it's not my fault. It's his fault because he's trying to destroy me. That's always the fallback, right? So if you want to end terrorism, you're going to have to engage in a political analysis of why people engage in those kinds of actions. What are the roots of terrorism? What are the sources of terrorism? And one of those sources is the frustration of national self-determination, like Palestinian self-determination, or for example, in the case of Israel. Okay, so And so let me then ask you another question. How do you respond to this statement? One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. So please vote. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And I think that's okay. Well, that's your response. Of course, the most famous freedom fighter slash terrorist. What was the name of that Korean man who assassinated the Japanese prime minister back in the 1920s? Of course, from the Japanese point of view, that person was a terrorist. But of course, from Korean point of view, that person was a national freedom fighter, right? Fighting for Korean independence from the Japanese Empire. And but at the time, what he did was illegal. But that doesn't mean it was wrong. Just because an act is illegal doesn't make it wrong, right? So 5-5-4, pretty much split there. Okay. Okay. In the time remaining, so the sources of terrorism and frustration of self-determination is a big source of terrorism, right? Because terrorism is typically the weapon of the weak. That's how it's typically described. People engage in terrorism when you're confronting big state governments with big militaries and lots of tanks and fighter jets and bombs. And so if you're under control by an occupying force, you engage in quote unquote what that occupying force labels terrorism, like the way the United States labeled the Taliban as terrorists against the United States forces and America's allies in Afghanistan. So this frustration of self-determination, particularly in the Arab world, continues. And it's a very sensitive topic because of the close American alliance with Israel. And America closely allied with Israel for a number of reasons, but the most important reason initially was that Israel was an America's ally during the Cold War. That America viewed the Iraq under Saddam Hussein or Syria under the Assad family as basically allies of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was viewed as basically a Russian version of Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union was trying to conquer the world through alliance with and support for its henchmen and allies in China, in Korea, in Latin America, in Africa. The United States, as I already mentioned, they played a role in getting Nelson Mandela arrested. They overthrew Patrice Lumumba. They helped overthrow Patrice Lumumba in 1960 in the Congo, put in Mobutu Sese Seko in 1960. They helped overthrow Salvador Allende in Chile in 1973 because he was an avowed Marxist who won an election in Chile. So the US worked with the elements of the Chilean society to overthrow him and put Augusto Pinochet in power, who stayed in power until 1990. So this was America's major, but not only motivation for supporting Israel, as well as the desire to support people who suffered during the Second World War, and also because the Israeli government was willing to cooperate with other groups within the Middle East who are not nationalists, like today the Saudi royal family, the United Arab Emirates royal families, traditional ruling aristocratic families in the Persian Gulf, the oil sheikdoms, as well as Jordan and Egypt, the royal family in Jordan. So, and this is an ongoing source of anger and hostility to those groups in the Middle East who view the Middle East is divided up and controlled by covert agents and clients of United States and Israel, is their view, including the, as I mentioned, the Saudi royal family, the Jordanian royal family, the oil sheikdoms in the Persian Gulf. And the reason I mention this is because this seems to be a critical part of explaining why do those people hijack American planes and crash them in the United States on September 11, 2001. And it's because of anger and hostility at America's alliance with these feudal, corrupt, traditional ruling groups in the Middle East. As one major source of that anger and hostility. And as I mentioned, these traditional ruling families in the Persian Gulf and elsewhere, they don't have much problem with Israel. They have an issue with Israel insofar as their public opinion is nationalistic and is very intensely concerned about the well-being of Palestinian Arabs because they're all Arabs and Arabs should fight for self-determination and unification. And this is an ongoing issue because since World War II, the Cold War has been over for 30 years, but the Israel lobby is really, really strong in the United States. It's been called the most effective lobby group over American foreign policy in the United States is the Israel lobby. And it's partly, it's really, really effective in shaping American policy in the Middle East because the Jewish American community is really highly motivated. They view Israel as a life and death issue for them because of the Holocaust and their experience of what happened to them in World War II. And from their point of view, they're tired of suffering. It's let somebody else suffer. Israel is the homeland of the Jews, and America has to support Israel. And they're really focused on maintaining American government support for Israel 30 years after the Cold War ended, and there's no longer this concern about containing communism, containing Soviet influence. That's done because the Soviet Union's gone, right? So, and this came to, so let's go back a bit. We talked about how, let me see, let me open up a file here. This PowerPoint slide that slides that I showed you the last class in another class, this role of minorities in relationship to nationalism. So we describe this as a state in which you have a core group, which is typically but not always named, is naming the state. So Germany, what's the core group in Germany? Germans. What's the core group in France? The French. What's the core group in Italy? Italians. What's the core group in the United States? We describe that as the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. White Protestant group was the core group into which Americans have assimilated, particularly European Americans, and including Catholics. So Catholics have assimilated into this group. And so Catholics also, there was, I mean, I think most of the people on the US Supreme Court are Catholics, which goes to show you the Catholics, even though Roman Catholic white people from Europe had been viewed with suspicion up to 100 years ago, they've assimilated into the core. And they also are very attracted to these minority groups that are advanced, including in the United States case, Jewish Americans. And we already highlighted how Asian Americans have been stereotyped in terms of the anti-Semitic stereotype and attacked by groups that are marginalized and disenfranchised traditionally, like African Americans and Hispanic and indigenous people in the United States. But Jewish Americans, many, not all of them, but many of them view Israel as a life and death issue. And it is human nature that if I self-identify intensely, say with the United States and with Israel, I am likely to view the protection of Israel as necessary for the protection of the United States. It's human nature not to want to perceive conflicts between important values to me. So if I'm a Jewish American who's also a proud American and a proud of Israel, it will be in my emotional needs to view the world around me in a way in which supporting Israel is necessary for the well-being of America. Just like if I'm an Islamic nationalist or an Arab nationalist, I'm likely to view protecting Palestinians in Palestine as necessary for the well-being of all Arabs or all Muslims, that we must pay the price of fighting for the protection of Palestinians and the liberation of Palestinians in Palestine because it's necessary for the well-being and survival of Muslims in Iran or Muslims in Iraq. It's human nature to see harmony between my different values and to see the world and advocate policies that promote all my values at the same time, because I don't like making difficult choices. Human beings do not like sacrificing something they have to get something else that they want. They want to see a world in which it's not necessary to sacrifice. And so for the Israel lobby, maintaining American support for Israel is essential. It is critical. Again, 30 years after the end of the Cold War. And there are these, of course, evangelical Protestant conservative nationalists who, because of their identity and their religion, believe Israel as a critical ally for the United States as well. So the Israel lobby includes not just Jewish Americans, it includes many white people, many white Anglo-Saxon Protestant and Catholics, evangelicals, that America's religious obligation is to support Israel because that's what God and Jesus want. And if you talk to these people, they will even say that the establishment of the state of Israel is an indicator of the second coming of Jesus. And America needs to prepare for the second coming of Jesus by doing its religious duty and support Israel, because that's what God wants, according to the Bible, as determined by the Moksha. And so it becomes part of American nationalism, particularly among those groups that support Donald Trump. So, as we said, 84% of voters in 2016 who described themselves as evangelicals, 84% of those people who described themselves as evangelicals who voted for Donald Trump. They were Donald Trump's main, not only, but his main base of support. And they are intensely supportive of Israel, despite Israel's behavior in expanding and occupying more and more territory, putting more and more Jewish settlements in occupied Palestinian territory. They view that as America's religious obligation, that they must support Israel, and Israel includes all of the Holy Land, including Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank, right, where Bethlehem and Hebron and these places that are populated, have been populated predominantly by Palestinians, Palestinian Arabs. And the reason why this comes to mind for me today is because I was in my office using my exercise equipment and listening to American radio, American National Public Radio. And, you know, it's the holiday season, it's the Christmas time. And let me open up, did I open up my lesson plan here? Okay, so let me open up this lesson plan. So, and let me share the screen with you. I think this is the lesson plan. And I was listening to National Public Radio, and I was listening to this section. So you see let me again, I have to share the screen here. This was being broadcast. This is the National Public Radio is a nonprofit entity that's existed for 50 years that provides better news service because it's not driven by for-profit commercial advertising needs, although it still needs a lot of money from corporations. It gets a lot of donation corporations. So they were having their broadcast for this season because it's Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday which emerges around this time when Americans celebrate Christmas. It's between typically American Thanksgiving, which is the last, I think the third Thursday in the month of November and until Christmas. And Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday which is celebrated at the same time, around the same time, because like the Asians, the Jewish religion uses a lunar moon calendar, right? So it moves around, but it's basically around late November into December during the same time as Christian Christmas. And as you know, Christmas is the main holiday in the United States, Christmas, New Year's. And this is really interesting because Hanukkah was not really a major Jewish holiday. This is an American Jewish creation, this holiday Hanukkah. So let me show you another news report in the New York Times highlighting this, and make sure you can see it, how Hanukkah was created. And this is from the New York Times, which highlights that more than 150 years ago, American Jews faced the opposite problem. Families settling in the US cities found that December was filled with cheer for Christian families, caroling, decorations, presents, Christmas, while Jewish children were left without much levity to distract them from the winter gloom. One Cincinnati rabbi, Cincinnati, Ohio, a city in the United States in Ohio. One Cincinnati rabbi happened across a neighborhood Christmas celebration and realized that Hanukkah, a holiday without much religious significance, could benefit from festive traditions, songs, Maccabee costumes, gifts. The children got oranges, a rarity in the midst of a Midwestern winter. Hanukkah became a way for Jews to reaffirm their commitment to Judaism in the face of pressure to be Christian, said Deanne Ashton, a historian and author of Hanukkah in America. Families are concerned about keeping their children happy to be Jewish at this time of year. And then retailers were eager to meet those concerns with tried and true American antidote to unhappy kids, more stuff. Musical menorahs entered the market starting in the 1950s, soon followed by Hanukkah sticker books and guilt-filled dreidels. Hallmark launched a line of cards for Jewish customers called Tree of Life in 1995. Today, more than 1 million Hanukkah cards are exchanged in the United States annually, according to the company. But the point is that this is really a creation of the Jewish experience in America, and I'm claiming it's evidence of Jewish assimilation. That Jewish Americans are assimilating into the American core culture, as evidence, for example, by coming up with Jewish copies of core culture holidays like Christmas, because Hanukkah was not really an important holiday in Jewish religion until, as I said, the 20th century, it became a holiday in America. I don't think it's really celebrated in Europe. And the reason I mentioned, because as I was listening to these Hanukkah broadcasts, these holiday broadcasts on National Public Radio, I was hearing these different broadcasts, and I just wanted to show you, the links, if I can here, without wasting too much time. So the links, you see this is National Public Hanukkah lights, and then another broadcast on National Public Radio I was listening to here is this traditional NPR broadcast. You see the menorah here, Jewish traditional food, celebrating Hanukkah in 2020. I first heard this broadcast in 2020. It was rebroadcast today or yesterday in US in 2021. And if you listen to any of these broadcasts, they always mention Israel. They have the, Christmas story. I mean, they have their stories about family and they're entertaining, but Israel, modern Israel, contemporary Israel comes up again and again and again in these broadcasts. That being Jewish in America, to be Jewish in America means to be deeply connected to Israel. During the most important holiday period in the United States, the holiday time between late November into January. Israel, Israel, Israel. And so it seems to me that this American commitment to Israel and all of the anger and hostility it generates among Muslims, that this European settler colonial state was created in the heart of the Arab nation in Palestine, amongst the Arab people in Palestine, is a source of fury and outrage for Islamists that the Americans label terrorists. And that is a major problem for the United States, obviously, and not to mention for everybody in the whole world. And because we're talking about, when we talk about these important family relations, it's like Chuseok for Koreans, right? It's the most personal family, or Lunar New Year for Koreans. These holidays are the most important personal family memories that you generate about warm times, about who it means to be Korean, about happy times with your family, and this is what you experience in the United States around this time with Hanukkah and Israel. And so this is, of course, the Israel lobby is really pushing the United States to sanction and eliminate Iran. It was the Israel lobby that was really pushing for the United States to invade Iraq and invade and destroy Libya. And now they're pushing to destroy Iran's capability to threaten Israel, including its nuclear program, even though, of course, Israel does have nuclear weapons. And that's a feature of this assimilation of these people into the core. And that's typically is highlighted in these news reports, right? And I mean, in this framework that in terms of overachieving minorities like Jews, like Asian Americans, to integrate those people, you have to be tolerant of them. And being tolerant of them means accepting their identity, but their identity in America, Jewish American identity, is so closely tied to Israel, it's a serious issue. Even though Israel's only been there since 1948. And as I said, for many Jewish Americans, this is seen, not just Jewish Americans, but Jews all over the world, Israel is seen as a life and death issue to them because of the Holocaust. So to go back, let me ask you to vote then on another topic here. So what's your response to this? Populist evangelical, make sure you can see it here. Populist evangelical conservative American nationalism has come to view Israel as a de facto part of the American national community. Do you strongly agree, can't decide, disagree, strongly disagree? I mean, I was listening to, this is National Public Radio is the most popular source of radio news, radio broadcasts for the intelligentsia in the United States. And it almost seemed to me, I mean, that this is a public relations exercise by the state of Israel. Because for Israel to survive and thrive, it must be closely and intensely supported by the United States. Israel could not survive without the United States. So please vote. And it just seems to me that America views Israel as being in its sphere of influence, and that means the Middle East, like Latin America. And this is what Putin is resisting by supporting his side in the Syrian war in Syria. The United States wants to dominate and control the Middle East the way it dominates and controls Latin America. And Putin does not want that because he wants a piece of the Middle East. Because, as I said, right, Syria and Iraq, they were allies of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And so this label of terrorism and is not going to go away, because this is the label used against people that resist outside control. So okay, well, I think that's it for today because we're out of time. And so I'm going to start meeting with people at 12 o'clock. And so I'll send you the link before the start of a minute or two before the start of your meeting with me. And your final drafts of your midterm are due a week from tomorrow at the course website, the Cyber Campus website. Okay, so I will be in touch with some of you, all of you, over the next few days. And I think that's it. Okay, anybody have any questions? If not, bye.